Okay. So everyone, my name is Tiffany, and today I'm going to teach you guys how to think like health insurance, because our health insurance or our healthcare system in the U.S. is just so complicated. I just kind of want to show you guys what the tip of the iceberg looks like. Okay, so I remember when I got my first real job, I was excited to get my own health insurance. I was at my parents' previously. And I just remember getting this super thick packet of papers like this thick, and it was called the evidence of coverage. And what it was supposed to show was what was covered and what wasn't. But I was just so confused because it was just all these terms that I didn't understand. And when I asked people for help, they would just refer me back to that packet, and it was not helpful at all. And I don't know if you guys experienced the same thing. So my solution was just try not to use as many services because I didn't want surprise bills. Which was great for catastrophic things, but not so. That's not the purpose of health insurance. And it wasn't until I actually worked in health insurance a few years later that I kind of understood. So this is just the basics. So you and I, we're members, and the way to think about it is that we're part of this club. We pay a monthly due called a premium to this club that's run by the health insurance company. And what it gives us is access to providers. And you'll hear the term a lot, providers. It's just a fancy way of saying anybody who provides a healthcare service. So it could be a doctor, a hospital, a wheelchair vendor, labs, drugs, and anybody. Okay, the other terms that I want you guys to keep in mind is in-network and out-of-network. And really what it means is whether a provider has a contract with the health insurance company. And this concept of contract will be important. I'll show you guys later. Okay, so in this situation, two providers, they both are considered in-network because they have contracts with the health insurance company. But for the same exact service, the contracted amount is very different, okay? And this is something to keep in mind. And the reason why it matters to you and me is because of this concept called co-insurance, where we are responsible for a percentage of the total cost. Okay, so if you see that this is really high and this is lower, it's different. And the other thing I wanted to share with you guys is the concept of what a rendering provider is. And a rendering provider is whoever actually provides a service. So you'll see here, right, Dr. House, he's the rendering provider because he's going to inject you with something. But there's another concept called billing provider, and it's not the rendering provider, it's whoever submits the bill for the service. So again, Dr. House provides a service, but he can belong to two billing providers. So one of them, he bills as an independent physician, and another one he's part of a medical group. And they both can contract with the same health insurance company, but again, the contracted amount is different. Okay, so if I want you guys to have a take-home message, okay, is your co-insurance is going to be different based on the contracted amount. It's not just the rendering provider. You need to ask who the billing provider is. And don't assume that your rendering provider is the same as your billing provider, okay? The last thing is, I'm going to show you some billing arrangements in healthcare, but I'm going to use this really weird restaurant analogy just to drive home a point. So just apply this to healthcare. Okay, so you go to this restaurant, and the host serves you, and then you sit down, and the server gives you a menu, you order mac and cheese, and then the chef, he comes and he personally gives you the mac and cheese, and you eat it, and it's great. And then you get the bill, but instead of getting one bill, you actually get three different bills, okay? And the first bill is from the restaurant, and the restaurant charges you for the host, the server, sitting down at the table, the chairs, using the utensils, the plates, and the ingredients for the mac and cheese. But then you get a second bill, and it's from the chef, and he charges you for serving the food and for mixing the mac and cheese and cooking it, okay? And then you get a third bill. I'll come up, but the third bill is from the sous chef who's in the background who grated the cheese. And all these services actually happen, but whoever is billing is different. And you'll see this in healthcare a lot, especially if you get a big surgery or something like that. And then you go to a sister restaurant, and at this restaurant, the same exact thing happens. It's like Groundhog Day, except now you get one bill. And this one bill comes from the chef, and it's because he owns the restaurant. And so he charges you one thing. And so that actually happens a lot too in healthcare, because a lot of physicians, they own their own practices, so they'll charge for everything. So that's just a little taste of the healthcare system, how it kind of works. And so Now you guys know about providers and billing and contracts. So
Are there questions? Are there too many questions? Okay, Victoria.
Okay, so I had a question about the contracting amounts.
Yeah.
So the lower it is, the better for you. But what is the amount? Is how much essentially the rendering.
oh, okay, yeah. So
the $1,000 is how much
So-
Dr. House charges to
Yeah,
my
it's-
insurance.
it's the contract's always with the billing provider.
Who's
so
the umbrella in that one?
oh, sorry, this is the health insurance
Okay.
company. So
Sorry.
your contract is always with the billing provider.
Right, but that means that the same service,
Yeah.
like Dr. House charges less if he's directly with the health insurance.
Yeah.
Okay,
And
that's
then
what
he-
it means.
And then Dr. House, like he's providing service, but he's part of a medical group.
Right.
That medical group may have
Charges
a lot
less.
of leverage, and so they're able to negotiate a higher fee with the health insurance company.
Okay.
And so it's, I mean, like, it sounds really weird, but this arrangement exists. And maybe not to the extreme of 3 times the cost, but,
Like Palo Alto Medical Group or something.
yeah, like,
It'd be
so,
interesting to see what examples are of each of these.
yeah.
Like where's Kaiser versus.
Okay, so Kaiser's a little different
Different.
because
Mhm.
they're doctors, they're all employees, and they all belong to the Kaiser Medical Group. Usually a lot of these doctors, they don't, they're not like independent, but UCSF is a very common one. A lot of doctors, they, you know, because they're superstars, so they'll have their own private practice, but then they'll also be part of UCSF Medical Group. And then depending on where, yeah. Oh, go ahead, yeah.
So yeah, if you run into this situation,
Yeah.
can you tell them specifically who you want the billing provider to be
Well,
if you have the same
You
doctor?
need a check because you can't just go to, like, let's say I'm like, oh, Dr. House, I know you're really famous and I want you to do my service. You have to say, I mean, without getting into more complex detail, but if I really, really wanted to make sure I didn't have any surprises, I would say, okay, first of all, do you contract with this health insurance? And they say yes, and I'm like, okay, well, who's gonna bill? And then they'll tell you like, oh, blah 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 medical group, because you know, either they're independent or they're part of a medical group. Both ways they will contract with the health insurance company, but that's not useful information to you. So then the next thing is, there's a whole concept of coding. I'm not going to talk about it here, but every single service you get, you break it down into codes. And if it's for something really large, usually there's another thing called prior authorization, where you have to get permission from the health insurance company to say, okay, I agree, like you really need these services and I'll pay for it. But you want to make sure whatever you get as part of your prior authorization matches the claim, because if it doesn't match, and if you don't have an HMO, you as a member are responsible for paying whatever the health insurance won't pay for. So that's another risk. If you're not part of an HMO, you are opening yourself to risk, and especially if that service is out of network. There's no contract. It can get really hairy. Yeah, and not to say like anybody's cheating anybody. It's just that's how the system works. Yeah.
So
Joe?
if you use the analogy of the restaurant, in a restaurant you have a fly in your soup, and then you have to figure out, okay, who you're gonna tell, and who's gonna bring you the new soup, and you know who's gonna do what about it. What's the equivalent in this situation with the healthcare? Like if there's something that goes wrong, who do you talk to? Do you have to talk to the person who's billing? Do you have to talk to the person?
Yeah.
It
That's a
doesn't
good
totally
question.
depend. It totally depends on the
Right,
situation. I guess.
because something could go wrong, right? And unless it's something very specific, like the anesthesiologist clearly gave the wrong dosage and that caused a reverse reaction, like it could be multiple things. And so I'm just thinking, if I were in that situation, how do I I know that it's not the hospital? I mean, in our system, unfortunately, it's usually the physician that kind of gets the blame. And the hospital, if we went back to the restaurant analogy, usually the hospital, they're responsible for something called institutional services, which is the nurses, the surgery center, or the scalpels, like the drugs, everything else. They break them down like that. So when you say something's at fault, it's not usually, it's because, the table was like dented or something. It's usually like human error. But then you can also have nurses that make mistakes too and cause something terrible to happen to you. In that case, it would be the hospital's responsibility. But I wouldn't know because it's, how would you know that it's like this specific? I don't know. I'm sorry.
It's too complicated.
It's very complicated.
Yeah, a lot of times if something goes wrong, you might not even be awake, like when it happens. So, so I think a lot of times if you bring suit against like a provider, there will be a phase called discovery, and that's when like investigators can go in and like question witnesses to like say you were asleep like the whole time something went wrong. Then people who are awake and actually like personally witness stuff, they would have to tell the investigator what happened. And there's internal investigators, there's like police, there's all sorts of people who do that sort of. That's a whole nother. You're right. It's a whole other bucket of fish. Yeah. We got 2 questions. Let's go for Go ahead.
Any other just general tips for being good like medical advocates for ourselves?
Yeah. Okay. So this is pretty common too. One of the things is, when you call, unfortunately, it's like when you call somebody, the health insurance company, say, hey, is this service covered? Like, I'm gonna have a baby, and I just want to make sure like everything is covered. Usually, the person on the phone, when they'll just say, oh, okay, like, like maternity services. Yes, I see the word maternity, and that's like covered. And they're just purely reading, but it's just a high level word. It doesn't really mean anything, and things actually mean are the specific codes and like what you actually get for every single thing. Like when I get an injection, there's a code for the drug itself, there's another code for the act of like injecting. And so you want to make sure, it's almost like you want to make sure you itemize like every single thing you're going to get, and then check with the person on the phone, like, okay, here are the codes, are those covered? Then the other thing that's, like a lot of health insurance companies, their systems, I mean, there's always going to be mistakes, and it's not just a procedure, whether it's covered or not. A lot of it is the context of stuff. So like ultrasound, for example, you can have ultrasound services in a maternity situation, or in another situation where it's like a kidney stone or something, right? And then like for maternity, you might have a co-insurance of like 30%, and then in another situation you might have a co-insurance of 50%.
Depends why you needed it.
Yeah, exactly. So even though the code is the same, right? You have to see what situation it is and what bucket it would fall. And sometimes the person on the phone, like when you call member services, sometimes they have that detail, other times they don't, because they're just purely reading something. And I've had friends who got like screwed because they got really bad advice for the person on the phone, and then when they got the bill, I mean, whoever, everything on the bill is correct, it's according to contract, but they just got really bad advice on the phone. Yeah, but if I were to get like a really serious procedure, I would honestly like talk to the provider and then tell them like, okay, I want you to give me fill out a claim, like fill out all the codes, like what you would send to the health insurance company, and then I would check with the health insurance company and say, based on this information, this is how exactly the combinations of codes they're going to bill, how much am I responsible for? And you want to shop around too, because the same procedure, like depending on where what the contract is, it can vary a lot. And a lot of it, it's like just purely by the negotiating power. It has nothing to do with the true cost of the procedure. So, yeah.
Wow, thank you.
This is.
But that's for like very. But if you're just going in for like a checkup, like I would not go through that. But if it's something like very major, because healthcare costs like that's like number. I think that's the reason why people go into bankruptcy. It can be really serious.
70% of bankruptcies.
Yeah.
We'll do one last question. This is like a super deep topic, but one more question.
This just came up because the thing of like speaking about like medical tourism when people actually choose to go out of the country rather than even
Because
with
they
their
know what they're gonna
insurance.
pay.
I mean, I don't know if you have any like thoughts or experience or.
I mean, I've heard of people doing that, and
You
I.
say shop around, but how can you shop around if you've got
Yeah.
Kaiser, if you have XYZ insurance, like I'm gonna have
Okay,
to have cancer
so-
with this person.
If you have Kaiser, then you're kind of locked
None
in
of
that
this
system.
happens if you have Kaiser.
Yeah,
I mean,
none of
Kaiser
this happens.
None of this happens.
Right.
Exactly.
But you could also have
Yeah.
like with Kaiser. I mean, if I have a really serious problem, like the best docs are not going to be at Kaiser. They're going to be at academic institutions. They're going to be at Stanford. They're going to be at UCSF. Like it's just a matter of is that the risk that you want to take, right? And I'm not to say that Kaiser physicians aren't good. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying like if you want the leading physicians, like who actually are like experts and really know what they're doing, I would not go to Kaiser. I mean, this is being recorded, but like, but, like just personally, yeah.
I've heard that before, that
Yeah.
Kaiser's excellent unless you're sick.
I mean, I think they provide. They're very. Their model is incredible. They are able to keep healthcare costs down. They're very streamlined. They're very efficient. They are in certain, yeah, like if you look at it from an end-to-end model, they are very efficient. But in terms of like, if you have a very specific special problem and you need the best of the best, like,
Well, I worked at Stanford and we had patients that got referred from Kaiser for specific cases. So Kaiser does make sure you get what you need, and if they don't have it, they send you elsewhere, and they do cover it.
This is like 5 more Simpson talks.
Yeah.
We could tell. Okay, Victoria's back to you.
What do you do? Like, what's your job?
oh,
Like,
okay,
how
so
do you know so
now
As if you told me you're like a kindergarten teacher, I'd be like, okay.
so I used to work for health insurance. Now I don't.
Okay.
I'm in biotech, but I just remembered like not understanding any of this until I worked in, I worked in there, and then I had to understand how the system connected. But like I always knew health insurance was really important because that protected you from like catastrophic costs, but I didn't understand how the information flowed or how everything connected, and why should I pay attention to certain things? Like why would that matter to me?
Thank you so much.
Yeah.